Hi, everyone. My name is Vincent L'Archeveque. I'm one of the founder of SimplicityBI. We are a data management and data everything consulting company based in Canada. I'm here with Jean-Marc Boivin from Desjardins, product owner and our senior architect of the data virtualization platform at Desjardins, like I said. So today we'll talk about the how Desjardins is approaching the silo issues that you get in most businesses when it comes to data using data virtualization, more specifically the Denodo platform. So before we get started, a couple of intro. For those who don't know Desjardins, Desjardins is one of the largest credit union in North America. They have 7 million members and clients, $300 billion in assets. 45,000 plus employees, and just to give you a sizing example, 4,000 people in IT. So they were founded about 150 years ago or so by someone called Alphonse Desjardins. It is truly a staple of the Quebec culture, but they are now doing business and opening branches across Canada, especially on the insurance side. They, like I said, they do a lot of banking, they do insurance, they do wealth management. They have, I can't remember exactly, 6 or 7 line of business that are doing all of those type of services. Basically, if you're born in Quebec, you likely had a bank account when that came with your birth certificate. It's a very much embedded into the culture and was for a long time. So before we dive into what Desjardins did with data virtualization, I wanted to baseline what data virtualization means to make sure that it makes sense to everyone listening. So data virtualization allows you to integrate disparate data sources in a real-time or near real-time fashion to do either analytical queries or transactional queries. It's able to do both cases depending what you want to do with it, and it's a fairly simple technology. If you're around in the 90s, you would know that about data federation. So this is the great-grandchildren of data federation. Very simply, what it does, it connects to disparate data sources. A data source can be a relational database. It can be a data warehouse, a data lake, files, web services, cloud, Excel spreadsheet, pretty much anything. I believe there's over 200 connectors available with the platform to connect to those sources. And what it does is it basically connects to the sources, and then from there you have basically the knowledge of the metadata of what exists in the sources from a structure point of view, and you can combine that data virtually without moving the data inside Denodo and then make it available for consumption. So a typical pattern would be I connect to SQL Server, Oracle, and a web service. I combine that data virtually into a single, what we call a view, and that you can then be consumed by Power BI or by Tableau or by Click, or you can even spin off a web service, a REST web service on top of it and make it part of a web app, for instance. So from a consumption point of view, most of the time what Denodo looks like is just a database. And you look at it and it looks like a bunch of tables, but those tables are truly empty and they are connecting to several sources. And when you issue a query to Denodo, it basically distributes the queries to all the sources, combines the data in real time, and serve it back to you. So that's data virtualization. And that's the core of it. It comes with a bunch of features around it. There's a cost optimizer, there's a static optimizer, there's a data catalog that allows you to navigate your data, do the data lineage, be able to see everything that was done to your data. There's a caching mechanism. You can leverage MPP engines. You can do something called data movement, which is part of the optimization tech strategy, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And that's the gist of it. That's why I say it's a great-grandchildren of federation. It doesn't just take data from 2 sources and just combine it. It's able to optimize, push down the queries. There's a lot of optimization possible there. All right, now that's done, we'll go back to Desjardins. So Desjardins, before data virtualization, had a lot of typical problems that you may have seen in your own business. As I mentioned, they have several data line of business, so 6 or 7 of them. Each of them have their own data sources. They have their own data warehouse. They may have their own data lake, and that data is very much in their own silos. And what's going on today is there's an increased need to do cross-line of business analytics. And what they need to do today is they copy the data. They may copy data between the sources. They may copy the data between the data warehouse in each line of business in order to leverage each other's data. That data movement increases the complexity of your entire infrastructure. Every time you move data, you're creating a new process that you need to maintain. You're creating potential point of failures and so on. And the data lineage of your business gets more and more complicated. And those cross-line of business analytical project or even transactional project are increasing over time. So this is just getting more and more complex. So the other challenge or the other thing that needed to be considered here is they needed to have a standardized way to talk across the lines of business. So each line of business have their own definition of a business entity, if you will. And it needs to remain. So inside each of those line of business, it needed to remain that language was still valid. Yet we needed a standardized language to combine the line of business. So how do you do that? How do you not redo the languages, yet have a common language to talk across the lines of business? The security is always something that's difficult to manage cross-system. And and the big problem too is that if you have 7 data warehouses or 6 data warehouses and so on, then you're going to have multiple access. So you may have a Power BI tool, a Tableau tool, a ClickView tool. They're connecting to different places. They might combine themselves the data. So there's a very much of a decentralized data access done by disparate tools in addition of that. And like I mentioned, with the digitalization, sorry, you know what I mean, of the world today, there's an increase in software. There's an increase in new tools coming online. There's migrations happening between like an old system and a new system. And so that landscape of the source data is changing rapidly. So the consequences of all that is basically data governance was not easy. It was a difficult thing to do. Doing any type of cross-source project, especially cross-line of business project, required time to commission the access, to get an approval on everything, set up the physical architecture if you needed to put some physical data copies somewhere, and the increase of maintenance. So every project was taking more time just to even get to the point where we can get started. And like I mentioned, traceability becomes difficult. In short, things were taking too much time, and there was an increased risk that was coming in over time. So typical option was to actually look at a data lake, and a lot of businesses are doing that. They just go get a data lake and they just dump everything they have into the data lake. Or they actually create yet one more data warehouse. So they might create a data warehouse to replace them all, or they might create a new one that combines them all. We know that data lakes and data warehouses are known to be projects that are high rate of failure, right? So it's something Gartner says over 80% have failed to meet the expectation. So those are high risk proposition to go. And when you have several data warehouses already, create a new one doesn't feel like the right thing. This is where enter data virtualization and Denodo. So what they needed to achieve with data virtualization, the first thing they needed to achieve was to stop the exponential duplication of data. And copying that data was increasing the complexity. At the minimum, we needed to stop increasing complexity. And this is where DV is inherently does that. That's its job. That is its first use case, is to actually reduce copy of data. Once this is done, it's to centralize the access. That way we can kind of govern the access of data and see what's going on with the data. And data virtualization in Denodo can become what we can paraphrase as a data gateway. It allows you to, you could connect to all of your source system and allow people to just access data through Denodo, and you'd be able to see what's going on in your data consumption across your enterprise. And the third thing was to basically have a way to have more flexibility and simplicity into your approach to data projects. So data virtualization is a paradigm that allows you to actually, over time, get to a point where you get to a development cost saving. So so Desjardins did a few POCs. took the time to actually understand the platform, see what it does, and once they decided to go for this, they actually, the first thing they did is they made it a foundational technology. So they decided Denodo is one of the technology that recognized by the enterprise architecture that any project can come in and say, I would like to use Denodo for this project for the following reason, and can make a case to say, this is a technology I need as part of my project. And that, because it's part of the enterprise architecture, then it comes with adequate support. So there's what they did is they put a team together, a center of excellence for data virtualization. So that's a team that takes care of Denodo. And I just want to preface here that we do believe, we tell all of our clients, like, you should have someone or a team taking care of Denodo. Depending on the size of your enterprise, it may be a person, it may be a team. In the case of Desjardins, I mentioned, they have probably like 4,000 in IT, so probably a couple hundred just in the BI space itself. So you're going to need more than one person to do the support of all of the project that's happening in all of those teams. So they basically created a team, dedicated team, and their job is to basically help all of the projects across the line of business that wants to use Denodo. Their job is to really nurture Denodo and care for it, make sure that people are educated how to use it, or the best practices are implemented. And so they put that in place right up front, which was amazing. It's not often this is an afterthought. In this case, was a upfront thought, and it was the good approach, a right approach for that. With that team in place and with those best practices in place, they actually proceeded to commission the full implementation of Denodo, dev, test, prod, and so on, under 6 months. So for a company like Desjardins with a fairly complex environment, 6 months is super fast. That implementation of Denodo can go between 2 days and 6 months, depending what you're dealing with. So that was a huge achievement, and they engaged SBI to help on the onset, to help them start on the right foot. And after 8 months, so from day one, they had basically that infrastructure in place, and they had 13 projects started, with 5 of them in production, which was a great success for them. So from that, the benefit and outcome that they got from this is very fast implementation, especially on the small and medium-sized project. What we've observed with our clients is your first project, you need to allow yourself some time to learn the platform. It's not a complicated platform, but there's things to know, and I'll talk about that in the next 2 slides. But when it comes to small and medium-sized project, you get a lot of momentum to actually implement those. As an example, they had to do a quick COVID data access project, and they were able to achieve that in days, which is nearly impossible in big organizations typically. On the larger project, you'll get also a lot of savings, but it might not be your first project, it might be your second, third, and fourth project. If they're sizable, you're going to get a lot of saving in development as well. One thing that happened too is, and that happens to every client, is Desjardins quickly realized that Denodo can do much more than just integrate data together. It's more than a data hub, and that's something that is an interesting thing. Is people always buy Denodo for a specific use case, and then they end up using it for that many more use cases. So they're still implementing there. They have several projects in flight today. And what we wanted to share there, which is probably the higher value for everyone here, is the lesson learned. It's what they've learned, the good things and the things to be careful with once you go in a Denodo implementation. So the first thing we have to keep in mind is when you go and acquire a tool like Denodo, it's more than a data hub. It does more than data integration. And so you have to consider that when you look at that platform and what it may bring to you. And once you start to understand that, so the core team started understanding how much Denodo can do for them, then you have to share that knowledge with all of your development teams, so they actually start thinking about it, how it could be used. One thing is going to happen though, and that happened at Desjardins, is when you share all those possibilities to those teams, you get to a point where you get the enthusiasm very, very high, and people start wanting to use it for everything. It's a little bit like a Swiss knife. So you want to keep that under control. You want to make sure that Denodo is used for the right use cases, and the data warehouse is still used for the right use cases, and ETL doesn't go away. It's not meant to replace those. It's meant to give an alternative, another approach to projects than just moving data in a data warehouse like you do typically today. Depending on your size, like we said earlier, having a team that's dedicated for Denodo is critical. We believe that it needs to be nurtured. It's a shared platform, and the shared platform needs to be there needs to be an oversight at the top to make sure that it's good. So you can have some clients have a person part-time to do that. Some clients have a team. It depends how much you're leveraging that platform, how many use cases you put in there. Excuse me. But primarily how many developers you're putting on it. If you put 200 developers on it, you're going to have a different need to care for that platform than if you have only a single developer that knows the platform really well. One of the big thing, and it's that happened at Desjardins, that's happening at every client, is the learning, being able for the developer, which typically are data engineers or ETL developers that are moving to Denodo, to think virtually. They need to actually change the way you think. An ETL developer is very much linear in his thought process. They want to go from A to B and then B to C and so on. In the virtual world, you have to think more in sets. And you have to think everything's going to happen at the same time. You want to have networking consideration a lot more than you would have in a typical ETL process. So there's a change of mind that needs to happen, and you have to allow some time for your team to get to that change of mind, and you want to give them the tools and the learning so they get there. The platform is very easy to use. Within minutes, an ETL developer can start building stuff in Denodo. That being said, if they didn't change their mindset to think virtually, performance will be a more problematic consideration. And that is actually not a roadblock, but a sticky point in the first project for every Denodo implementation is, and that happened at Desjardins as well, is they had to redo some things once they really understood how it works. And you're like, okay, I see it now. We have to go back and do a few things. And it's part of the learning process. And one of the best things to do is to have, I'll get to that in a second, actually. So yeah, what I was about to say here is in the first project, having a Denodo expert that basically mentor you to the project. They do code review, they do education. They look at what you've done and they say, well, hold on, that's going to work now, but in 6 months, you might find that there was a better approach. Here's what you should do and why. That will fast track your competency by months, having someone that helps you there. So it's something that we highly recommend for obvious reasons. And then the next thing that Desjardins is still working on is there's a feature. So I'm just going to step back and go back to the Denodo platform and what it does. It has a cost optimizer. It has that cost optimizer and that static optimizer have multiple techniques to actually delegate queries to the sources in the best way possible. And as an example, there's multiple things, but as an example, there's something called the data movement. So if you have two data warehouses, one has 1 billion fact table and one has a 100 row dimension, and you need to join those two, the optimal way to do that in order to minimize how much data goes through your network is actually to take that 1,000 rows and copy them in a temp table right beside your big fact table. And then you do the join and you return it only 1,000 rows instead of actually bringing the 1 billion rows in memory, the 1,000 rows in memory, and then filter that to 100 row. That's called the data movement feature. Well, something like this requires some changes in your sources. So you want to create a space, you want to carve out a space where Denodo is allowed to create a temp table beside your fact table, beside your big transactional table. Very often, there's resistance from the DBA source at the source to do those type of changes in their infrastructure, and that's something that looking back, getting the DBA involved earlier in adopting the data virtualization would allow you to get those data movement features enabled, and then the platform will actually perform that much better. So those are the lessons learned from Desjardins that they wanted to share. Get your expert in. Make sure that you share all the learning with your team. Get the DBA involved, and make sure that you start thinking virtually and allow some time for this. This is what we have for this presentation. I'm available for question, and Jean-Marc is online as well to answer any question you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vincent and Jean-Marc. So looking at our Q&A, we do have a question. Someone is wondering, can small, medium businesses utilize this? Can it alleviate issues with smaller team sizes?
Hi. Yes, absolutely. One of the first use cases which we did with Denodo was a smaller business, depending what you mean by small business. But we were able to avoid having an entire data warehouse. They haven't built a warehouse. To this day, they haven't built a warehouse to combine information across different sources without having to have that. Yep. Thank you. Sorry. Sorry, I was muted. I'll go back to that question. Yeah, small business can definitely use Denodo. One of the first use cases we've done with Denodo was actually in a scenario where they didn't want to have a data warehouse. Now, I'm not saying that's the way to approach data virtualization in general, but in their specific scenario and situation, they were able to basically use Denodo as a replacement to a warehouse. And to this day, they're still using it in this fashion.
That's great to know. So it looks like we don't have any other questions. I'll do one last look. That's it. I'm seeing a comment from someone that their parents used Desjardins for some of their financial investments and they were happy with the customer service.
Good.
Fantastic.
We do our best.